My name's Mike 36, and my wife is Sarah 34. We've been married for 7 years and have 2 kids, Emma 6 and Jake 4. Life's been busy but pretty good, or so I thought. Sarah and I met at a bar back in our early 20s. She was feisty, confident, and honestly way out of my league. I was your typical nerdy guy, fresh out of college, but we hit it off. She always knew how to command a room and had this infectious energy that I found intoxicating. I thought, how did I get so lucky? Over the years, life got more complicated, as it does. We moved to the suburbs, had kids, and settled into the routine of work, diapers, school pickups, and date nights that were more about survival than romance. But that was okay. At least I thought it was. We were a team, right? That's what marriage is all about. Weathering the storms together. Except lately, it felt like I was weathering the storm alone. Looking back, the signs were all there, but I didn't see them for what they were. Sarah started going out more, girl nights, she called them. She started working out religiously, which I thought was great at first. She'd always complained about wanting to get in shape, and I wanted to be supportive. But the new clothes, the constant texting, and the way she'd light up every time her phone buzzed, that started to sting. I brought it up once, jokingly. Wow, you've been texting more than our teenage neighbor these days. What's so interesting? Her reply? Oh, Mike, don't be such a loser. It's just work stuff. A loser. That word stung more than it should have. I laughed it off, but that pit in my stomach didn't go away. The thing is, I'm not an overly suspicious guy. I've always trusted Sarah. She was my person, you know? But over the next few weeks, those little things started piling up like breadcrumbs leading to a place I didn't want to go. She started being overly protective of her phone. She used to leave it lying around anywhere, kitchen counter, bedside table, even in the bathroom. Now, it was practically glued to her hip. If I even glanced in its direction, she'd snatch it up like I was going to crack her passcode and leak national secrets. When I asked her about it, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Privacy isn't a crime, Mike." God, you're so controlling. Controlling? Me? I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted to understand why the woman who used to share every random thought with me suddenly needed so much privacy. Then came the late nights. She started working late a lot more often. At first, I believed her. She had a demanding job in marketing, and I know deadlines can be brutal. But when she'd come home smelling like a mix of cheap wine and cologne that wasn't mine, I couldn't ignore it. I asked her point blank once, "Did you go out after work?" Her answer was so nonchalant, it made me question my own sanity. "Yeah, Mike, I grab a drink with some colleagues. Do I need to text you every time I take a sip of Chardonnay?" She had this way of flipping things, making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. And every time I tried to push back, she'd either brush me off or get defensive. The fights started becoming more frequent. Never anything explosive, just these little, bitter spats that left me feeling hollow and questioning myself. But the final breadcrumb? That came when I found a receipt. It was from a fancy Italian restaurant downtown, a place we used to go for anniversaries. I wasn't snooping. It was just sitting there on the passenger seat of her car when I went to grab Emma's backpack. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and dessert. I stared at it for a full minute, my hands shaking. We hadn't been there in over a year. When I asked her about it, her explanation was so rehearsed it made my stomach churn. "Oh, that was with Amy. She's been having a rough time since her breakup, so I took her out to cheer her up. Is that a problem, Mike?" Her tone was sharp, daring me to challenge her. And maybe I should have, but I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just tired, stressed, imagining things. I let it go, or at least I tried to, but deep down I think I already knew. That pit in my stomach turned into a permanent resident. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but every time I tried to bring it up, Sarah would either snap at me or turn it around like I was the crazy one. "You're being paranoid," she'd say. "Why don't you trust me?" Why didn't I trust her? Because her behavior was screaming at me not to. Things escalated when she suddenly started dressing differently, sexier. Don't get me wrong, I loved seeing her all dolled up, but it felt calculated. She'd leave for her girl nights in dresses I hadn't seen in years, ones that hugged her figure a little too perfectly. And then there was the lingerie. She started buying all this new stuff, things she'd never worn for me. When I asked her about it, she laughed like I was clueless. "Mike, I'm a grown woman. I can buy nice things for myself without it being about you. I let it go again, but inside, I was fuming. Who was it about then? One Friday night, she said she was meeting Amy again. I didn't argue. I was tired of fighting, tired of the tension that hung over us like a storm cloud. But something in me told me not to let it go this time. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her location on our shared phone plan. She wasn't at the wine bar she claimed to be at. She was downtown, at a boutique hotel. I don't even remember the drive there. My hands were gripping the wheel so tight, I thought I might snap it in two. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I parked a block away and just sat there, staring at the hotel entrance, trying to decide if I was ready to walk through that door and confirm what I already knew deep down. And then I saw her. She walked out with him. Some guy in a fitted suit, tall, dark hair, hand resting on the small of her back like he owned her. She was laughing, head tilted back like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. I couldn't move. I just sat there, watching as they walked to his car and drove off. When I finally made it home, she was already there, lounging on the couch in sweats like nothing had happened. She looked up at me and smiled. "Hey, you're home late. How was your night?" I didn't answer. I went straight to the bedroom and locked the door behind me. I needed space, time to process, but all I could think was, what the hell do I do now? The next morning, I woke up early, still seething but trying to keep myself together. Sarah was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee like it was just another Saturday morning. She even greeted me with a cheerful, "Good morning, sleepyhead," like she hadn't been out with another man last night. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who was he, Sarah?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw you last night. I saw you leave that hotel with him." For a second, her face froze, and I thought maybe she'd finally own up to it. But then, just like that, the walls went up. She laughed, like I'd just told her the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. "You're insane, Mike. Do you hear yourself? I was with Amy, like I told you. Amy doesn't drive a black BMW," and put his hand on your back. I shot back. Her jaw tightened. "You're stalking me now? Jesus Christ, Mike, this is pathetic. What? Did you follow me all night? Sit outside like some creepy PI? No, Sarah, I didn't need to. Your lies are doing all the work for me." At this point, she was full-on defensive, throwing out every excuse and accusation she could think of. "You're paranoid. You're jealous. This is why we've been fighting so much, because you can't handle that I have a life outside of you." "A life outside of me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Sarah, you're having an affair. Don't try to spin this like I'm the problem." She threw her hands up, exasperated. "Fine, you want the truth?" "Yes, I went out with someone, but it's not what you think. He's just a friend. We had drinks, that's it. God, Mike, not every man I talk to wants to sleep with me." "A friend?" I said, incredulous. "A friend who takes you to a hotel?" "I wasn't in a hotel," she snapped. "And you're insane if you think I'd cheat on you. Maybe if you stopped acting like a paranoid freak, we wouldn't be having these problems." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just lying. She was gaslighting me, trying to make me feel like I was losing my mind. And the worst part? A small part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew better. I'd seen her with my own eyes. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't jealousy. This was betrayal, plain and simple. And no amount of her spinning the story could change that. I couldn't stay in the house. I grabbed my keys and left without another word, leaving her standing there, arms crossed, like she was the victim in all of this. I drove aimlessly for hours, the adrenaline keeping me going until the reality of it all hit me like a tidal wave. The woman I'd built a life with, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was lying to my face. And I had no idea what to do next. I drove around aimlessly, my mind racing in 100 different directions. At some point, I ended up in the parking lot of a diner we used to go to before we had kids. I don't even know why. It wasn't like sitting in a booth and ordering pancakes was going to make everything better. But I needed somewhere to think, somewhere I wouldn't feel like the walls were closing in. Sitting there, staring at the menu I wasn't going to order from, it hit me. This wasn't the life I signed up for. This wasn't the Sarah I married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Either way, the weight of it all settled on my chest like a boulder. For years, I'd chalked up her little jabs, her dismissive comments, and her tendency to rewrite reality as just Sarah being Sarah. But now I realized it was more than that. This wasn't some one-off mistake. This was a pattern. She'd been bending the truth for years, and I'd been too naive, or maybe too scared to call her out on it. I scrolled through my phone, looking at pictures of us. There we were on our wedding day. Her smile, so bright it made me want to believe she was incapable of doing what I'd seen with my own eyes. Pictures of the kids popped up, too. Emma's first birthday, Jake's preschool graduation. How do I explain this to them? How do you tell your kids their mom is what? A liar? A cheater? Both? And then, almost like on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Text after text after text. Mike, please come home so we can talk. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry I snapped at you earlier, but you're blowing this out of proportion. You're letting your insecurities ruin our marriage. My insecurities? That one stung, but it also lit a fire in me. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. And instead of owning up to it, she was doubling down, trying to pin this on me. Typical. I ignored her messages and called my best friend, Ryan. We hadn't talked much lately. Life gets busy, but he's one of those friends you can always count on, no matter how much time has passed. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. She's cheating on me, man. Ryan didn't need me to explain. He just listened while I unloaded everything, from the hotel to her gaslighting to the texts she was bombarding me with. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, just let me get it all out. Finally, when I was done, he said, Mike, you don't deserve this shit. Whatever happens next, just know you're not crazy. She's the one screwing this up, not you. It wasn't a solution, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize I needed to take control of the situation instead of letting Sarah twist it into something it wasn't. Enough to make me see that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the kids, about the life I wanted for them. So I drove home. Not because I was ready to forgive her or even ready to talk, but because I needed answers and I wasn't going to let her dance around them anymore. When I walked through the front door, Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just imploded our entire marriage. She looked up when she saw me, her expression a mix of relief and defiance. Finally, she said, setting her phone down. Can we talk like adults now? Her tone was so patronizing, it made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. I sat down across from her, arms crossed, and said, start talking. Okay, she began, shifting uncomfortably. I don't know what you think you saw, but I swear it's not what it looks like. Oh, really? I said, leaning forward, because what it looks like is my wife sneaking around with another man and lying to my face about it. Her eyes darted away for a second, but she quickly recovered. Mike, you're making this into something it's not. The guy you saw? He's just a colleague. We had a drink to talk about work stuff, and that's it. At a hotel? I shot back. Because most work meetings don't involve reservations at a boutique hotel, Sarah. She huffed, rolling her eyes. You're being ridiculous. I didn't go into the hotel. He did. I was just dropping him off. Stop lying. I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. I saw you, Sarah. You walked out of that hotel with him. You were laughing, touching him. Don't insult me by pretending I'm blind. Her face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I wasn't sure. Fine, she spat. We had drinks, okay? And yeah, he flirted with me a little. But nothing happened. God, Mike, you're so dramatic. Flirting? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's your defense? You're married, Sarah. You don't get to flirt a little with some guy while I'm home, putting the kids to bed. She stood up, pacing now. You don't understand, Mike. Do you know how lonely I've been? You're always working, always tired. When's the last time we went on a date? When's the last time you even looked at me like you used to? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I've been here, Sarah. I've been working my ass off to give us this life, to make sure you and the kids have everything you need. And this is how you repay me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't soften me. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said quietly. I like the attention, okay? It made me feel good about myself. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. So what? My attention wasn't enough for you? You needed some guy in a suit to stroke your ego? It's not like that, she shouted, her voice cracking. I didn't sleep with him. Do you think that makes it better? I yelled back. You lied to me. You lied about where you were, who you were with, and what you were doing. How am I supposed to trust you after this? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, staring at me with tears streaming down her face, like she was the one who'd been betrayed. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of her sniffling. I stood up, grabbing my keys. I need space, I said, heading for the door. You need to figure out what the hell you want, Sarah. Because if this is the kind of marriage you're okay with, I'm not. And just like that, I left. Again. But this time it felt different. This time, I knew there was no going back to how things were. The question was, did I even want to try? I drove to Ryan's place. He answered the door in sweatpants, holding a beer and looking concerned. You back already? He asked. I pushed past him, collapsing onto his couch. She admitted to it. Well, sort of. She said she didn't sleep with him. But, God, Ryan, she was there. She lied right to my face. He handed me a beer, sat down next to me, and said nothing for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, my voice cracking. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm confused. Part of me wants to burn everything down, pack her stuff, throw it on the lawn, and tell her to get out. But then there's the kids. Emma and Jake deserve better than this. Ryan nodded, taking a long sip of his beer. You don't have to decide tonight, man. Take your time. Let it settle. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this situation was simple. My mind was a storm of emotions. Anger at Sarah for betraying me, sadness for what we'd lost, and fear for what came next. I felt like I was spinning, unable to find solid ground. I stayed at Ryan's that night. He offered me his guest room, but I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching his arm, walking out of that hotel like she didn't have a husband and 2 kids waiting for her at home. The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts from Sarah. Mike, I'm sorry. Please come home. I don't want to lose you. Can we talk? The kids are asking where you are. That last one hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever my feelings towards Sarah were, Emma and Jake were innocent in all this. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of our mess. I texted her back, short and to the point. I'll be home later. Ryan cooked up some scrambled eggs while I stared blankly at the kitchen table. You know, he said, sliding a plate in front of me. If you want, I can help you find a lawyer. The thought made my stomach turn. Was I really there? Was this really happening? I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said, pushing the eggs around with my fork. That's fair, he said. But when you are, let me know. I've got a cousin who's been through this. She swears by her guy. I nodded, appreciating the gesture, but unable to focus on it. My brain was stuck in a loop, replaying the last few days over and over again, searching for some sign, some clue that I'd missed. Maybe if I'd paid more attention, been more present, I could have stopped this before it started. Or maybe it had nothing to do with me at all. Around midday, I finally mustered up the courage to head home. I wasn't ready for another fight, but I couldn't avoid Sarah forever. The kids needed me, and I needed to face whatever came next. When I walked through the door, Emma and Jake ran to me, their little arms wrapping around my legs. Daddy, they shouted, their faces lighting up like I'd been gone for years. I knelt down, hugging them tight, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of calm. This, I thought, is what matters. Not the lies, not the betrayal, this. My kids, their happiness, their future. But when I looked up, Sarah was standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes puffy from crying. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. Not now, I said, my voice firm. I'm here for the kids. That's it. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stepped aside, letting me pass, as I carried Emma and Jake into the living room. For now, that was all I could handle. The rest of the day was spent with the kids. We played board games, built a fort in the living room, and watched their favorite cartoons. I laughed when Emma made a tower out of pillows that Jake immediately knocked over, but inside, I felt like I was on autopilot. Every now and then, I'd catch Sarah hovering in the doorway, watching us, but I pretended not to notice. I wasn't ready to talk, and I think she knew that. When bedtime rolled around, I read the kids a story. One of those picture books they'd both heard 1,000 times but still loved. As I tucked them in, Emma looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" I froze for a second, my throat tightening. "No, sweetie," I lied, brushing her hair back. "Mommy and I just had a little disagreement, that's all. Everything's fine." She smiled, satisfied with my answer, and I kissed her goodnight. But as I closed their bedroom door, I felt the weight of the lie crushing me. Nothing about this was fine. When I came downstairs, Sarah was sitting on the couch, waiting for me. She'd changed into sweats, her face bare of makeup, looking more like the Sarah I used to know. But I wasn't about to let her appearance soften me. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice trembling just enough to make me wonder if the tears were real or part of the act. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath, like she was about to give a performance. "Mike, I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes. But I need you to believe me when I say I didn't sleep with him. It was just flirting, and it went too far. I let myself get caught up in something stupid, but I never crossed that line." I stared at her, my expression blank. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," she insisted, her voice rising. "I didn't want to hurt you. I've been feeling so disconnected, so unloved." I let out a bitter laugh. "Unloved? Sarah, do you have any idea how hard I've been working to make this life for us? For you? For the kids? And you're telling me you felt unloved?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her hands. "It's not an excuse. I know that. But I was lonely, Mike. You're always busy, always stressed. I needed something." I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again. "So instead of talking to me, instead of saying, 'Hey, Mike, I'm feeling lonely, let's work on this,' you decided to go out and flirt with some random guy? You decided to sneak around and lie to me?" She wiped her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know how to talk to you." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You didn't want to talk to me. You wanted an escape, and you found it. Don't try to pin this on me." She flinched at my words, but didn't argue. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, she said, "I don't want to lose you, Mike. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't even know if that's possible." And with that, I left the room, retreating to the guest bedroom for the night. I needed space, time to think, but one thing was clear. No matter how much she claimed to want to fix things, this wasn't something that could be solved with a simple apology. Something had broken between us, and I wasn't sure it could ever be put back together. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mind had been racing all night, replaying Sarah's words and trying to figure out if I even believed her. Did it matter if she hadn't slept with him? The betrayal felt the same. When I came downstairs, Sarah was already in the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids. She looked up as I entered, her face a mix of hope and dread. "Morning," she said softly. I nodded but didn't respond. I wasn't ready for round 2 of our argument. I kissed the kids on their heads and poured myself a cup of coffee, deliberately keeping my distance. The awkward silence stretched on until Emma piped up. "Mommy, are you and Daddy still fighting?" Sarah's face crumbled for a moment before she quickly plastered on a smile. "No, it's with you. Everything's fine. Right, Mike?" I looked at her, my stomach turning at how easily she could lie, how practiced it sounded. "Sure," I said flatly, not wanting to upset the kids, but also unwilling to play along with her charade. After breakfast, I told the kids I needed to run some errands. In truth, I just needed to get out of the house and clear my head. I called Ryan again, but this time, I had a different plan. "Hey," I said when he picked up, "I need that lawyer contact you mentioned." There was a pause on the other end. "You sure about this, man?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I need to know my options. I can't keep living like this." Ryan texted me the contact info, and I spent the next hour parked in a random lot, staring at my phone. Calling a divorce lawyer felt so final, like I was admitting defeat, walking away from everything we'd built. But the alternative, staying in a marriage built on lies, felt worse. Finally, I made the call. The lawyer, Lisa, was calm and professional, walking me through the process and answering all my questions without judgment. She explained what I'd need to gather: financial records, evidence of the affair if I wanted to use it in the proceedings, and a clear idea of custody arrangements for the kids. I thanked her and hung up, my head spinning. I wasn't ready to file. Not yet. But just having the information made me feel like I had some control, like I wasn't completely at Sarah's mercy. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me in the living room. The kids were upstairs playing, their laughter echoing down the hallway. She stood up as I entered, wringing her hands nervously. "Mike, can we please talk?" she asked, her voice shaking. I hesitated, then nodded. "Fine." She sat back down, and I took the chair across from her, keeping as much physical distance as I could. She took a deep breath, as if trying to steel herself. "I know I've hurt you," she began. "And I know I've made mistakes, huge ones. But I don't want to lose this, Mike. I don't want to lose us. I love you, and I love our family. Please, just tell me what I can do to fix this." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't tell if they were coming from guilt, fear, or genuine remorse. "Do you really think an apology is enough?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. "You broke my trust, Sarah. How do you expect me to believe anything you say now?" "I don't," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself to you. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need." Her desperation was palpable, but it wasn't enough to erase what she'd done. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out if this is even worth saving." She nodded, her face crumpling as the tears spilled over. "Take all the time you need. Just please don't give up on us." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and walked away, retreating to the guest bedroom again. I needed space, time to think, and most of all, I needed to decide if I could ever forgive her. But in that moment, forgiveness felt like a distant possibility, buried under layers of anger and hurt. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The tension in the house was suffocating. Sarah and I barely spoke unless it was about the kids, and even then, our conversations were clipped and mechanical. The kids could sense something was wrong. They weren't dumb, but they didn't ask many questions. I think they were scared of the answers. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office just to avoid coming home. Sarah, for her part, tried to act like everything was normal. She cooked dinner, helped with homework, and even started dressing down around the house, like she was trying to show me she wasn't out to impress anyone else anymore. But it felt hollow, forced. One night, about a week after our big blowout, she approached me after the kids had gone to bed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a glass of whiskey, when she sat down across from me. "I've been looking at a therapist," she said softly. "I found one who specializes in couples counseling. I thought maybe we could go together." I took a long sip of my drink before responding. "Counseling won't fix this, Sarah. You think some therapist is going to wave a magic wand and make me forget what you did? Forget how you lied to me?" She flinched at my words but didn't back down. "I know it's not that simple, but I'm willing to do the work, Mike. I'm willing to face whatever it takes to make this right." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She looked tired, her face pale and drawn, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered the hotel, the lies, the gaslighting, and the pity was gone. "You're willing to do the work now," I said, my voice flat. "But where was this willingness before? Where was this effort when you decided to run off and flirt with another man instead of talking to me?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was stupid and selfish, and I don't know. But I do know I love you, Mike. And I love our family. Please don't throw that away." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But how could I? How could I trust that this wasn't just another manipulation, another lie to keep me from walking out the door? "I need time," I said again, my voice firmer this time. "And you need to figure out if you're doing this because you actually want to fix things or because you're scared of losing your comfortable life." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, sobbing. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. My heart was too raw, too angry. I got up, poured the rest of my whiskey down the sink, and went to bed. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I made a decision. I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. For the sake of the kids, if nothing else, I owed it to them to try. But trying didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean forgiving. Not yet. The next morning, I told Sarah I'd agree to counseling. Her relief was palpable, but I made it clear this wasn't a clean slate. This is your last chance, Sarah. If I catch you lying to me again, even once, I'm done. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and promised she'd do whatever it took. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but I knew better than to take her at her word. Trust, I realized, wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It would take time, if it could be rebuilt at all. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure it was a fight worth winning. The following week, Sarah scheduled our first couples therapy session. It was on a Thursday evening after work and school, which meant we had to ask a neighbor to watch the kids. I could tell Sarah was nervous as we drove to the therapist's office. She kept fidgeting with her hands and glancing over at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. I didn't make it easier for her. I was still too raw, too angry to offer any reassurance. The therapist, Dr. Caldwell, was an older woman with a calm demeanor and a soft voice. Her office was cozy, filled with plants and shelves lined with books about relationships and human behavior. She greeted us warmly, but I couldn't help feeling like we were being dissected under a microscope the moment we walked in. So, Dr. Caldwell began after we'd settled into our chairs. What brings you both here today? Sarah looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I wasn't going to bail her out. She needed to own this. After an awkward silence, she finally spoke. I've made some mistakes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hurt Mike. I lied to him, and I broke his trust. And how did you hurt him? Dr. Caldwell prompted. Sarah hesitated, glancing at me again. I raised an eyebrow, silently daring her to sugarcoat it. I had an emotional affair, she admitted, her voice trembling. I met someone, and I let it go too far. I didn't sleep with him, but I lied to Mike about where I was and who I was with. I made him feel like he couldn't trust me. Dr. Caldwell nodded, jotting something down in her notebook. Then she turned to me. Mike, how did that make you feel? I scoffed. How do you think it made me feel? Betrayed. Humiliated. Like the last 7 years of my life were a lie. Sarah flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to spare her feelings. I get that people make mistakes. I continued, my voice growing more heated. But she didn't just make a mistake. She lied over and over again, and then tried to make me feel like I was crazy for noticing. Dr. Caldwell held up a hand. Let's pause for a moment. Sarah, do you understand why Mike feels this way? Yes, Sarah said quickly. I do. I know I hurt him, and I hate myself for it. I've been trying to apologize, but I don't think he believes me. Do you believe her, Mike? Dr. Caldwell asked. I hesitated, my jaw tightening. I don't know. I want to, but how can I? She's lied to me before. What's to stop her from doing it again? Dr. Caldwell nodded, her expression sympathetic. Rebuilding trust is a long and difficult process. It's not just about words, it's about actions. Sarah, if you want to regain Mike's trust, you'll need to show him, consistently, that you're committed to honesty and transparency. I will, Sarah said, her voice firm. I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the wounds were still fresh, and her promises felt like empty words. The session ended with Dr. Caldwell assigning us homework. For me, it was to write down what I needed from Sarah to start rebuilding trust. For Sarah, it was to list the ways she'd been dishonest in the past and how she planned to change going forward. The drive home was quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. I meant what I said in there, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. I need you to give me a chance. I stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel. We'll see. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for being distant. She'd made her bed. Now it was up to her to prove she deserved to stay in it. That night, I sat down with the notebook Dr. Caldwell had given me, trying to figure out what I needed from Sarah to even consider starting over. It wasn't an easy task. How do you put betrayal into bullet points? How do you articulate a feeling so visceral that it kept you up at night, eating away at your peace of mind? But I knew if I didn't try, there was no point in therapy. So I wrote, complete honesty. No more half-truths, no more omissions, no more it's not what it looks like. Accountability. I needed her to take ownership of what she'd done without excuses or trying to shift blame onto me. Transparency. If she wanted me to trust her again, she needed to give me access to her life, her phone, her schedule, her social circle. No more secret meetups or private texts. Effort. I needed to see her working on herself and our marriage, not just saying she would. It felt strange to write it all down like I was giving her a roadmap to win me back. But at the same time, it felt necessary. Without clear boundaries, this was all just a waste of time. Meanwhile, Sarah kept herself busy, avoiding the guest room where I still slept. She'd started cleaning obsessively, decluttering the house, organizing the pantry, folding laundry with military precision. It was her way of trying to make up for things, I guess, but it only annoyed me. I didn't need a spotless house. I needed a wife I could trust. The next evening, she handed me her homework. It was a handwritten list several pages long, outlining every lie she could remember telling me, about where she'd been, who she'd been with, even small, seemingly insignificant things like saying she'd forgotten to call when she really hadn't wanted to. I didn't realize how much I'd been lying until I wrote it all down, she admitted, her voice trembling as she handed me the papers. I'm so sorry, Mike. I scanned the pages, my jaw tightening with every new entry. Some of the lies were ones I already knew about, but others blindsided me. Like the time she'd gone to a concert I thought she couldn't afford because she'd won tickets. Or the girls' trip she'd taken last summer that had apparently included the same guy from the hotel. Why are you giving me this now? I asked, my voice flat. Why didn't you tell me the truth when it mattered? She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. Because I was selfish. I didn't want to deal with the consequences. But I'm done with that, Mike. I'm done hiding things from you. It was hard to tell if she was being genuine or just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. You know this doesn't fix anything, right? I said, holding up the list. Writing it down doesn't erase what you did. I know, she said quickly. But it's a start. I wasn't sure if I agreed. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her. Maybe remorse, maybe desperation. Whatever it was, it gave me a sliver of hope. Not for us, necessarily, but for me. For the possibility that someday I might find a way forward. Whether it was with her or without her, I didn't know. But it was something. That weekend, Emma finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Daddy, why are you sleeping in the guest room? I froze, caught off guard by her innocent curiosity. It's just easier for now, sweetie. Daddy's been snoring a lot, and I don't want to wake Mommy up. It was a terrible lie, but she seemed to accept it, nodding solemnly. Jake, on the other hand, wasn't buying it. Mommy says she doesn't care about snoring, he said, his little face scrunched up in confusion. I forced a smile. Well, it's just temporary, buddy. Don't worry. But as I walked away, their questions echoed in my mind. How long could we keep this charade going? How long could I pretend everything was fine for their sake when it felt like my entire world was falling apart? The answer, I realized, was not much longer. Something had to give, and soon. By Monday morning, the weight of it all felt unbearable. The kids' questions, Sarah's endless attempts to make things right, and my own conflicting emotions were like a storm I couldn't escape. I went to work as usual, but my focus was shot. Every email, every meeting, every conversation felt meaningless compared to the chaos at home. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I booked our next therapy session for Wednesday. Please come home early that night. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. The thought of sitting in that office again, dissecting our broken marriage, felt exhausting. But I couldn't avoid it forever, so I replied with a simple, okay. When I got home that evening, the tension was palpable. Sarah had cooked dinner, spaghetti, my favorite, but the gesture felt hollow. The kids were cheerful, oblivious to the storm brewing between us, and I tried to match their energy. But every time I glanced at Sarah, sitting across the table, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. After the kids were in bed, Sarah approached me in the living room. Can we talk? She asked, her voice tentative. I sighed, setting down the remote. What now? I've been thinking about what you said, she began, sitting on the edge of the couch. About how I need to show you, not just tell you, that I'm serious about fixing this. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I want to delete my social media accounts, she said. All of them. Facebook, Instagram, everything. And I'll give you full access to my phone, my email, whatever you need. I blinked, caught off guard. Why now? Because I want to prove to you that I'm done hiding, she said, her eyes pleading. I know it won't fix everything, but it's a step, right? It was a step, sure, but it felt more like a desperate Hail Mary than a genuine attempt at change. Deleting your social media doesn't erase what happened, I said. It doesn't rebuild trust. I know, she said quickly, but I don't know what else to do, Mike. I'm trying. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the lies, Sarah. It's about the fact that you chose someone else over me, over our family. How am I supposed to come back from that? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But instead, she took a deep breath and said, I'll keep trying, Mike. As long as it takes. Later that night, as I lay in the guest room, I couldn't stop replaying her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. But another part of me couldn't shake the image of her with that man, laughing, touching, betraying me. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I noticed her phone sitting on the counter. She was in the shower, and for a split second, I considered picking it up, scrolling through her messages, looking for proof that she was still lying to me. But I didn't, because at the end of the day, I realized it didn't matter. Even if her phone was clean, even if she was telling the truth now, the damage was already done. The trust we'd built over 7 years was gone, and I wasn't sure it could ever come back. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by anger or confusion. Instead, I felt resigned. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. And something had to change. When I got home that evening, the air felt heavier than usual. Sarah was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, but her movements were slower, more deliberate. She didn't look at me as I set my keys down and shrugged off my coat. How was work? She asked, her voice cautious. Fine, I replied, walking past her to grab a glass of water. She turned off the stove and leaned against the counter. Mike, I was thinking, maybe we need to talk about what comes next. I set the glass down and looked at her. What do you mean? Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying all day. I mean whatever we're doing. I feel like we're just going through the motions, and I don't know if that's fair to either of us. It was the first time she'd acknowledged how broken things were, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, What are you trying to say, Sarah? Are you giving up? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I'm not giving up. I think we need to figure out if we're trying to save this marriage because we want to or because we're scared of what happens if we don't. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Relief? Sadness? Maybe both. I don't know, I admitted. I've been asking myself the same thing. We sat down at the table, the dinner she'd cooked forgotten. For the first time in weeks, we had a real conversation. Not an argument, not a therapy session, just two people trying to make sense of the mess they'd made of their lives. She talked about her guilt, her fear of losing me, and the emptiness that had driven her to seek attention elsewhere. I talked about my anger, my hurt, and the wall I'd built around myself to keep from being hurt again. By the end of the conversation, neither of us had any answers. But we both agreed on one thing. We couldn't keep living in limbo. We needed to make a decision, one way or the other. I'll schedule another therapy session, she said as we cleared the table. And, if you want, I'll move to the guest room for a while. Give you some space. I nodded, appreciating the gesture, but not sure if it would make a difference. Okay, I said simply. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time, it felt like we were moving towards something, even if I didn't know what that something was. Whether we stayed together or parted ways, at least we were finally facing the truth. The next day, I called Lisa, the lawyer Ryan had recommended, and scheduled a consultation. I wasn't ready to file for divorce, but I wanted to be prepared if it came to that. At the same time, I agreed to continue therapy with Sarah, at least for a few more sessions. I owed it to myself and to the kids to explore every option before making a final decision. When I told Sarah about the lawyer, she didn't argue or cry. She just nodded and said, "I understand." It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The days leading up to the next therapy session were tense, but strangely peaceful. Sarah moved into the guest room as promised, giving me the space I desperately needed. She didn't press me with questions or try to force conversations, and for that, I was grateful. It gave me room to breathe, to think about what I truly wanted. When we walked into Dr. Caldwell's office that week, I felt lighter. Not hopeful, exactly, but less burdened. Maybe it was because I'd started to accept that no matter how this ended, I'd survive. Or maybe it was because I finally had some semblance of a plan. Dr. Caldwell greeted us warmly and asked how things had been since our last session. Sarah went first, talking about the list she'd written and how much it had opened her eyes to her own behavior. She admitted she still had a long way to go, but insisted she was committed to doing the work. Then it was my turn. "I've been thinking a lot about what I need," I said, my voice steady. "Not just from Sarah, but for myself. And I've realized that I can't make a decision about this marriage until I feel like I've done everything I can to heal, whether we stay together or not." Dr. Caldwell nodded. "That's a healthy approach, Mike. What steps do you think you need to take to start that healing process?" "I've started talking to a lawyer," I said, glancing at Sarah. Her face tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "I'm not filing for divorce, not yet. But I need to understand my options, especially for the kids. At the same time, I'm willing to keep coming to therapy and see if there's anything worth saving here." "And how does that make you feel, Sarah?" Dr. Caldwell asked. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Scared," she admitted. "But I understand why he's doing it. And if that's what he needs to feel secure, then I'll support him." It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something close to hope. Not for us, necessarily, but for her. Maybe she was finally starting to take responsibility, not just for what she'd done to me, but for the person she wanted to become. As we drove home that night, the tension between us felt different, less suffocating, more resolute. Like we were finally on the same page, even if that page was one of uncertainty. When we pulled into the driveway, Sarah turned to me and said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "For giving me this chance," she said. "For not walking away the second things got hard." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and got out of the car. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. One of Emma and Jake playing in the backyard, one of Sarah and me on our honeymoon, smiling like we had the world figured out. I thought about how much had changed since those pictures were taken, how much had been lost, and how much I still had to fight for. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could see the road ahead. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't easy, but it was there. And whether that road led back to Sarah or away from her, I knew I'd be okay. Because I deserved more. And so did the kids. And maybe, just maybe, so did she.